Just how good was Patsy Gallacher? That's a question to which we'd struggle to reach a definitive answer, even if there was film footage of him playing at his peak. In the complete absence of any footage, it becomes a question even more difficult to answer. We can't see him play, and it's very doubtful now if there is anyone still alive who can remember seeing him play. All we can do, almost a century after he retired from playing, is read contemporary match reports and listen to the testimonies of those who were fortunate enough to have witnessed him in action. One thing that is certain, though, is that there were people whose lifetimes allowed them to see both Gallacher and the Lisbon Lions, and who insisted Patsy was the greatest Celt of them all. One man almost uniquely placed to judge the issue was Jimmy McGrory, who played alongside Gallacher and later managed Tully, Collins, Evans, Peacock, McNeil, Murdoch, Johnston, Chalmers and Lennox, and remained involved at Celtic until the late 1970s. He states in his biography, A Lifetime in Paradise, written with Gerald McNee, "Many people have asked me how Patsy would have stood up to the rigours of the modern game. He would have strolled through it. There is no present-day player in this country that I would put anywhere near his class. Even Jimmy Johnston, with all his talents, never reached the Gallacher heights." It's hardly unusual for an old man, reminiscing about the halcyon days of his youth, to rate his contemporaries as superior to the new generation. McGrory's recollections were no doubt coloured by feelings of nostalgia for friends and comrades now gone, but they should not be easily dismissed either. When asked who was the best centre-forward he'd ever seen play for Celtic, McGrory had no hesitation in naming Joe McBride, even though in his boyhood the forward line had been led by the legendary Jimmy Quinn. Maybe his judgment wasn't always clouded by nostalgia. It should also be borne in mind when assessing Patsy Gallacher's merits in comparison to modern day players that football has changed a lot since his heyday in the first quarter of the 20th century. The game is played today by probably the fastest, fittest, strongest players ever. There will be those who argue that a 1920s player cannot compare physically to those of the present day. But modern players benefit from superior equipment and facilities, from using lighter footballs and boots to playing on smooth hybrid pitches and far more advanced sports science, better training and better nutrition, of which Gallacher never enjoyed the benefits. If Patsy Gallacher had been born around the turn of the 21st century, who's to say he would not have been just as fast and just as fit as any of the players of the past 40 years? Another complicating factor is that football itself has changed since Gallacher's day, and this makes it difficult to compare him to modern players. For most of his career, every team employed the 2-3-5 formation. But a simple rule change, implemented from the beginning of season 1925-26, had an enormous impact on how football was played. The offside rule before 1925 stated that there must be at least 3 defenders between the most advanced attacker and the goal when the ball was passed forward. Those 3 defenders were, of course, the goalkeeper and the 2 fullbacks. From season 1925-26, there only had to be 2 defenders between the most advanced attacker and goal, and initially there was a glut of goals. In response, Arsenal manager Herbert Chapman decided to move his centre-half from the half-back line, which we would now call the midfield, back into the defence between the 2 fullbacks, giving birth to the centre-back, although confusingly the number 5 was still often referred to as the centre-half. The fullbacks had traditionally been the tallest, strongest players in any team, so the centre-back was of similar stature, and centre-forwards now found themselves confronted by physically imposing bruisers, where the centre-halves who had previously picked up the opposing centre-forward were normally smaller, more mobile and more skillful players. As Chapman's new WM formation gained popularity, managers quickly tired of seeing their centre-forwards dominated physically by bigger markers, and to fight fire with fire, the equally imposing target man centre-forward made his appearance, with the consequence that the long ball game became increasingly common. Jonathan Wilson, writing in Inverting the Pyramid, A History of the Development of Tactics in Football, quotes Jimmy Hogan, One of the great early coaches of the game, and who in his late 60s had a brief spell as a coach at Celtic from 1948 to 50, on the development of the WM and the emergence of the target man. The result was, in my opinion, the ruination of British football, with the accent on defence and bringing about the big kicking game, which put an end to the playing of constructive football. Through this type of game, our players lost the touch and feeling for the ball. Before 1925, great store was placed on what Scottish football writers called good combination play, and British fans in the first quarter of the century, in all likelihood, saw a more sophisticated type of game, with the emphasis on short passing and movement than the generations who followed, and Patsy Gallacher was one of its finest exponents. Route 1 football, with its emphasis on physicality and the aerial bombardment, was a product of that offside change in 1925. Chapman's WM would hold sway into the 1950s, when Hungarian coaches became concerned about a dearth of good target men in their country. Martin Bukovi, the coach of MTK Budapest, hit upon the idea that if there was no suitable target man available, why bother having one at all? His solution was to draw the number 9 into a deeper role behind the other forwards, and this meant one of the half-backs could then drop into defence alongside the centre-back to provide more defensive solidity. He had essentially invented the 4-2-4 system with which Hungary destroyed England at Wembley in 1953 and was gradually adopted by British clubs in the late 1950s, although the WM survived into the mid-60s in Scotland, and by the time Celtic adopted 4-2-4 under Jock Stein in 1966, Alf Ramsey had already developed the 4-3-3 formation for his wingless wonders World Cup winning side. The 4-3-3 would be adopted by the great Dutch sides of the 1970s, and by 1980 the 4-4-2 was increasingly prevalent in Britain at least. What does this have to do with Patsy Gallacher? Patsy was an inside forward, and when the WM fell out of use, the inside forward ceased to exist. So if we try to compare Patsy Gallacher to modern players, we would not be comparing like with like. The closest approximation to an inside forward in the modern game is the number 10, but the role is not exactly the same. The orthodox inside right of the early part of the 20th century was a creator, a schemer, a fetch and carry player, whose main job was to send his outside right racing towards the byline to cross into the box, or to create chances with through balls for the centre forward. Peter Summers, inside left of the great Edwardian side, was dubbed Celtic's powder monkey by Willie Maley. In the Royal Navy, in the age of sail, powder monkeys fetched gunpowder from the munitions stores below decks and carried it as quickly as possible to the gun positions. They were usually young boys, small and nimble enough to dodge along the crowded decks as they raced to and fro, and not be spotted above the gunwales by enemy snipers. Maley's nickname was an apt one, Summers being a quick, elusive dribbler and accurate passer. The inside right of that team, in contrast to the scurrying Summers, was Jimmy McMenemy, who was a far more cerebral player, his nickname of Napoleon reflecting his generalship of the side. Patsy Gallacher combined the best qualities of each of them, and surpassed them both. Patsy's ball control, twisting and turning and feinting and jinking, set him apart from anything seen before in Scottish football. By 1912, McMenemy had been moved to inside left by Maley to accommodate Gallacher. If we had to compare Patsy Gallacher to a modern player, then, like a combination of the best qualities of Summers and McMenemy, the mighty atom is probably best likened to a combination of Lubomir Moravcik and Paul McStay, both brilliantly unorthodox individualist and a cerebral, composed on-field general. Nothing like Gallacher had ever been seen in the Scottish game before, and a correspondent in the Dundee Evening Telegraph of the 13th of April 1925, presumably a very disappointed Dundee sympathiser, could not contain his admiration for the man who more than anyone else took the Scottish Cup away from the Taysiders. Patsy Gallacher, the inimitable, the football wizard supreme, wonderful Patsy, clever up to the point of the superhuman. The football art as portrayed by Patsy Gallacher could not be acquired in 1,000 years. It's a gift, and Patsy has it from the crown of his head to the bottom edge of the studs on his football boots. as they ran out onto the pitch at Cathkin Park for their Scottish Cup first round match against Third Lanark on the 24th of January 1925. The Celtic team knew that the Cup was their only realistic hope of silverware that season. 3 defeats to Rangers, Airdrieonians and Motherwell in their first 5 matches of the new year meant they were sitting 4th in the league table, 8 points adrift of third-placed Hibernian and a whopping 16 points behind leaders Rangers, who were on 44 points after 26 games. Also no doubt on their minds was the 7-0 league win over the Warriors at Celtic Park on the 5th of January, one of only 2 wins since the turn of the year. Celtic were favourites, but they were by no means certainties, and defeat would effectively have ended their season. It had been a truly exasperating campaign, with fans at their wits' end, and that angst was felt amongst the Celtic community worldwide, with a group of Celtic fans in New York feeling compelled to write to Celtic partisan Man in the Know of the Glasgow Observer, demanding to know what was going on at Celtic Park. The stateside Celts letter was published in Man in the Know's column on the morning of Celtic's trip to Cathkin Park. Dear Man in the Know, can you please inform me what really is wrong with Celtic? To the many staunch supporters of the Green and White Brigade who are now located in the land of the mighty dollar, where football is merely a farce, it is positively galling to see practically every week in the sports papers here the name of one team, Celtic, amongst a list of defeated clubs in the Scottish League. I may ask, what are the world's champions coming to? Within the past month or so, they have bit the dust to such lowly clubs as Morton, Queens, Thistle, Hearts, Accies and Motherwell, which makes one think that they are now aiming at breaking the record for successive defeats. But we here in America sincerely hope this state of affairs won't last long, and it is the fervent desire of every true Celtic follower to see the name of Celtic FC inscribed once more on the Scottish Cup. Hoping that all the Celtic players who read this will step on the gas and make things snappy for the rest of the season, I am, etc., Manhattan. Celtic would be without their new centre-half, Vincent McGrogan, a recent signing from Largs Thistle, who had been sent off in the defeat to Motherwell 7 days before. Man in the Know bemoaned the circumstances, the ordering off coming a week after press criticism of the youngster during a win over Aberdeen on the 10th of January 1925. He wrote, "Certainly Vincent heaved them about, as the saying goes, but he did nothing to anybody comparable to some of the things done on Gallacher in the same game. Things so unpardonably coarse that Patsy, even with Sindai confronting him, was stung into perfectly justifiable retaliation and only kept down his fists by a mighty effort of self-control. McGrogan's every least offence was blazoned abroad in the evening and Sunday press. Not a word was said about the Aberdeen bruisers. Consequently, in taking the field at Motherwell, the big Celt was a marked man. The offence which brought his dismissal was, in itself, about value for a free kick. But there was behind it the mighty mountain of press comment referred to above." McGrogan's dismissal sparked crowd trouble, and a stone was thrown which hit a Motherwell player, and both uniformed and plainclothes police rushed onto the terracing and made 4 arrests before order was restored. Man in the Know concluded, "Most of the trouble on these occasions is of course due to the provocative attitude and language of the orange crowd, to whom Motherwell owes so much of its notoriety. The astonishing thing is that any Celtic supporter revealing his colour ever gets home alive." Third Lanark were without their star player Tommy McInally, signed from Celtic in 1922 and who would return to Celtic in August that year. McInally's career was a catalogue of disciplinary issues, and he had been sent off in their 7-0 loss to Celtic. He was charged with tripping the referee, which resulted in the incredibly lenient sentence of 1 month's suspension. The Traveller, in the Sunday Post of the 26th of January 1925, could barely contain his disbelief, and his words also support Man in the Know's views of the McGrogan dismissal. 1 month for deliberately pulling the feet from the referee? 1 month! And Vincent McGrogan of Celtic gets a fortnight for a first offence, and an offence that friend and foe alike described as trifling. The match kicked off at 2:45 p.m, but even so, part of the second half of the game was played in near darkness because of a partial eclipse of the sun that afternoon. Celtic lined up Shevlin, W. McStay, Hilly, Wilson, J. McStay, McFarlane, Connolly, Gallacher, McGrory, Thompson, McLean. The first half was a keenly contested affair, the Glasgow Herald of the 26th of January 1925 reporting, "Over 40,000 were present at the match between 3rd Lanark and Celtic, and witnessed in the first half at least a thrilling contest. 3rd Lanark scored the first goal, and though Celtic equalised before the interval, the balance of play had favoured 3rd Lanark." The opener came after 30 minutes, 3rd's right half frame lobbing over a cross which deceived keeper Peter Shevlin and dropped in off the far post. Man in the Know, in the Glasgow Observer of the 31st of January 1925, described it as incredibly fluky. Joy for 3rds was short-lived, with Jimmy McGrory, making his first appearance for 4 months because of injury, hauling Celtic level within 3 minutes. Peter Wilson combined smartly with Pat Connolly to work the ball to Patsy Gallacher, who slipped it to McGrory to arrow a right foot shot across the keeper and in at his right-hand post. Brigadier in the Daily Record of the 26th of January reported, "Then McGill and Higgins and the halfbacks survived a gruelling spell, for the Celtic forwards were going great guns, Gallacher still leading them with his feints and swerves and dexterous side foot passes." Man in the Know, in the Glasgow Observer of the 31st of January, was far more effusive. "From that moment we saw the real Celts, displaying something like old-time Celtic form. The funereal gloom caused by the man in the moon blanketing Old Sol was lightened and brightened by the dazzling cantrips of the Celtic forwards, responding finally to Gallacher's heroic lead. The second half may be regarded as one of Patsy's greatest periods, and he has had so many crowded hours of glorious life. No words could adequately describe his wonderful work. Every trick in his magical outfit was exploited, every swerve and feint and dainty sideslip utilised for the increasing demoralisation of the unhappy warriors. Not confining himself to individual jazzing and juggling, Gallacher opened up the game with perfect passes to Connolly, neat slips ahead to McGrory, and long swinging crosses out to McLean. McGrory scored his second of the day in the first minute of the second half, heading home a corner kick from Connolly. But the defining moment of the match came 10 minutes later, when Frame shot for goal with Shevlin grounded and helpless, and Jimmy McStay fisted the ball away from almost under the bar. This illustrates another change in the game since Gallacher's time. Today McStay would have been ordered off, and Celtic reduced to 10 men for the last half hour of the tie. It's not recorded if McStay was even cautioned. 3rd's inside right, John Blair, had been nominated as the penalty taker before the match, but had been injured and gone off the field a few minutes before. Captain Tom Williamson nominated their right winger Reid to take the kick, but almost as the decision was made, Blair emerged from the pavilion to rejoin the match, and Reid was stood down, with Blair taking the kick. Man in the Know reported, "He failed ignominiously, merely spooning a soft, apologetic ball into our goalie's waiting hands. That finished the game as a contest. 3rd never got near Shevlin again." On 67 minutes, Celtic went further ahead, and it was peerless Patsy who grabbed this one, with a powerful drive which the keeper failed to hold, the ball spilling from his hands into the net. There are conflicting reports about the identity of the scorer of the fourth goal, Brigadier and Man in the Know crediting Alec Thompson with heading in a Connolly free kick, while the Sunday Post reported it was Jimmy McGrory. In the closing minutes, McGrory recorded at least a hat-trick. Man in the Know wrote approvingly, "The crowd was rapidly thinning away, and great gaps showed in the terracing when McGrory, in a neat dribble, bored in and gallantly drove home his own 3rd and his side's 5th. I remarked last week that, if the Garngather were to displace Fleming, he would need to show us something special. Well, he showed it. His 3 goals against a none too scrupulous defence speak for themselves." The win at Cathkin Park saw a burst of optimism about Celtic's hopes for the remainder of the season. It was too late to make any difference in the league race, but they would lose only 2 more matches that season, and already sights were being set on the Scottish Cup. Man in the Know wrote, Celtic supporters, stimulated by Saturday's great cup victory, are visualising bright days ahead. Overseas followers of the green and white will doubtless rejoice over the revival, and the New York bunch, whose letter I printed last week, will feel good that the boys stepped on the gas, whatever that may mean, and recorded a thumping triumph. Due to the fire at the Four Courts in Dublin in 1922, as the Irish Civil War began in earnest, destroying centuries of Ireland's public records, there is some confusion as to exactly where and when Patsy Gallacher was born. He was born into crushing poverty to illiterate parents in March 1891, and his birth certificate gives his birthplace as the village of Ramilton, County Donegal. But there are indications that he was actually born in the workhouse at nearby Milford. His family believe his birthday was the 16th of March 1891. By the turn of the 20th century, the Gallacher family, parents William and Margaret, their 4 boys Johnny, Willie, Jimmy and Patsy, and 3 girls, Madge, Mary and Maggie, had moved to Scotland in search of work, setting up home in the unfortunately named John Knox Street in Clydebank, where William would find employment in the shipyards. A curious detail in the story of peerless Patsy is the spelling of his surname. The family name was Gallacher with a G, but when they moved into their home in Clydebank and had a nameplate bolted to the door, the tradesman who provided it assumed it was spelled with a C in the Scots fashion, and the illiterate William and Margaret did not notice the mistake. Officially, the name remained Gallacher with a G, and newspaper reports throughout his career name him in the Irish fashion. But Patsy himself always spelled his name with a C, which was, David Potter writes, a token perhaps of his increasing determination to be and to remain Scottish. Young Patsy soon displayed great promise as a footballer, but presumably most senior clubs were put off by his slight stature. He was only 5'7" and looked as though he might be blown over by a stiff breeze. And so by the time he was 20 years old in 1911, he was playing not in the senior game, but with Clydebank juniors. It was here that he first came to the attention of Celtic, and in later years, Waverley of the Daily Record would claim the credit for bringing him to Celtic's attention. He wrote in the Daily Record of the 2nd of October 1926, I think it was in 1908 when I paid a special visit to the Kilbowie Road ground to see a young fellow named Casey perform on the junior Clydebank right touchline. All juniordom was talking of this little chap. I had not been many minutes in the ground when I lost sight of Casey. Why, you may ask? Because all the players afield, Kirkintilloch Rob Roy provided the opposition in this cup tie, were eclipsed by Gallacher. The little fellow was simply great. My story in the following Monday's Daily Record brought Mr. Maley to my Renfield Lane den. Is this Gallacher boy all you say about him? He asked. Yes, but don't do anything without seeing him, was my reply. There's little or nothing of him. He may not be big enough for you. All right, we'll give him a trial, rejoined Mr. Maley. I'll take him down to Dumfries with us on Thursday, and I'll let you know how he gets on. Willie Angus, later a Lanarkshire VC, had a trial with the Celts in the same match, and Mr. Maley was as good as his word. That night, when he called, he opened with, He's all you said. He's wee, but he's teuch. We've signed him. Waverley's memory was obviously a little out, and it was in 1911 that this trial match took place. David Potter writes that he was invited to play in 2 trial matches in October 1911. Gallacher played for Celtic in Dumfries that October holiday. Celtic won 6-1 and Gallacher scored twice. He clearly impressed the Celtic men so much that on the train home he was invited to have another game a few weeks later against an Army 11. This time young Gallacher scored a hat-trick in a 5-0 victory. Celtic did play a match against Dumfries on the local Rood Fair holiday of Thursday the 28th of September 1911, winning 6-1, and the Celtic wiki entry for the match states, "A player called Smith played for Celtic today and scored twice. He was in fact Patsy Gallacher." While this may be the case, contemporary reports make no mention of a Smith playing for Celtic that day. The Daily Record match report of the 29th of September 1911 lists the team as Adams, McCormick, McGregor, Mitchell, Nicholl, O'Brien, McMenemy, McAtee, Jackson, Travers, Hamilton. The report gives the Celtic scorers as David Hamilton with 2, Andy McAtee with a hat-trick and 1 for Paddy Travers. Potter writes that Gallacher was offered and accepted a part-time contract with Celtic on the 11th of November 1911, and this may have been the day of his final match for Clydebank Juniors. The Scottish referee of Monday the 13th of November 1911 gives a list of the top scorers in the first and second divisions. The only Celtic player in the top 10 is Jimmy McMenemy on 6 goals after 12 matches. Below is the list of top scorers in the Glasgow Junior League, showing Gallacher of Clydebank Juniors as joint second with 7 goals. The paper also gives a brief report on Clydebank Juniors' 6-1 win over Shettleston. The correspondent writes, "Gallacher opened the scoring 15 minutes from the start," and concludes, "For the juniors, the entire defence played grandly, and of the forwards, Lone and Gallacher were outstanding." There's no mention of Gallacher having signed for Celtic in that edition, and by Thursday the 16th of November 1911, the Daily Record writes of the Junior League, "With 11 goals to his credit, Lone of Clydebank is Glasgow Junior League top scorer. Gallacher, his clever clubmate, shares the second position with Whittle of Cambuslang Rangers." It's not clear from contemporary reports exactly when and how Patsy Gallacher joined Celtic, but 2 days later the Dundee Courier reported that he had signed for the club. That same day, the Northern Daily Telegraph, based in Lancashire of all places, reported, "Celtic FC have made what is considered to be an important addition to their playing strength by signing on Patrick Gallacher of Clydebank Juniors, who has achieved a big reputation in junior circles. Gallacher, who is possessed of excellent physique and has been playing at inside right for the Clydebank combination, has been regarded with favour by several First League clubs, and the Parkhead directors are fortunate in being able to secure his services. He is stated to be able to fill any position in the attacking line." The young Gallacher had joined Celtic at a difficult time for the club. The great 6-in-a-row side of the first decade of the century had been strong enough to survive the defection of Alec Bennett to Rangers in 1908, but time had finally caught up with them, and in the summer of 1911, Captain Jimmy Hay left for Newcastle United after a contract dispute, while Peter Summers had been allowed to join Hamilton the summer before. Jimmy Quinn was now 33, and he was missing more and more games through injury as a decade of being on the receiving end of boots and elbows finally took its toll, while the great outside left of that side, Davy Hamilton, would soon be allowed to leave for Dundee. The league season of 1910-11 had been a great disappointment, Celtic finishing in 5th place while winning fewer than half of their games, but honour being saved by their Scottish Cup win after a replayed final in which they beat Hamilton Accies 2-0 at Ibrox on the 15th of April 1911. While the league was, and is, the ultimate test of a team's abilities on the domestic scene, in this period, the Scottish Cup was still a more prestigious competition than the League Championship, and would remain so until at least the 1930s. One of the main reasons for the founding of the Scottish League in 1890 had been to guarantee clubs that they would still have fixtures to play on a Saturday afternoon if they were knocked out in the early rounds of the Cup. When Queen's Park refused to participate, believing it was a Trojan horse for the introduction of professionalism, the league members responded by refusing to play them in friendly fixtures. This was a big step because in the early 1890s, Queen's Park were still a big draw and one of the top teams in the country, winning the Scottish Cup as late as 1893. Winning the Scottish Cup when the league had been lost was not quite the consolation prize it would feel like today. Winning the Scottish Cup in the early years of the 20th century made it a successful season regardless of where you finished in the league. Season 1911-12 had seen an improvement in Celtic's league fortunes compared with the previous season, but in the week Patsy Gallacher signed for Celtic, they were second in the table, 3 points behind Rangers who had 2 games in hand. To emphasise their superior position, Rangers had dropped only 1 point and had scored 8 more goals than Celtic while conceding 10 fewer. A misfiring Celtic were not having a great season, and it didn't take Patsy long to break into the team, the Daily Record of the 23rd of November 1911 reporting, "It will be cheering news to Celtic supporters to learn that Quinn is again fit and will take his place in the team on Saturday week against St Mirren at Parkhead. It is expected that Mulrooney, the new goalkeeper, and Gallacher, the inside right from Clydebank, will also be playing that day." The main draw that day was the returning Quinn, making his second comeback of the season, and not the frail-looking 20-year-old who must surely have drawn a sceptical look or two from his new teammates. Graham McCall writes in the official biography of Celtic, "A radically different type of player took over from Quinn as the favourite of the Celtic support. If you put that wee thing on the park, you'll be done for manslaughter, so you will," Quinn himself said to Willie Maley on first setting eyes on Patsy Gallacher, who stood 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed just over 9 stones. We can only guess at how Patsy Gallacher was feeling as he took to the pitch that cold, wet, overcast December afternoon. Surely he must have been feeling nervous, but in a photograph published in the Daily Record of the 4th of December 1911, he did a fine job of hiding it as he stood, arms folded across his chest, affecting a nonchalant look in the green change jersey Celtic wore that day. They lined up Adams, McNair, Dodds, Young, Loney, Johnston, McAtee, Gallacher, Quinn, Donaldson, Brown. It would have surprised no one in the ground when St Mirren took the lead, with a cross from Callahan that sailed over the heads of everyone in the penalty box and landed in the back of the net. Celtic equalised through inside left Andy Donaldson, who headed in a cross just before half-time. It was all Celtic in the second half, and after Peter Johnston put Celtic ahead, Willie Loney sealed the points with a 30-yard shot. The young Gallacher made a good impression on his debut, the Daily Record reporting, "Gallacher, a slimly built youth who knows as many tricks as his seniors, established himself a favourite right away. That he knows the inside forward game thoroughly there can be no question, and if his penetrative power is not great, he is elusive enough to make up for any deficiency in the matter of physique. Altogether, he played a pretty and useful game, and his debut in the higher grade of football was eminently successful." The Scottish referee of the 4th of December 1911, after mentioning that Patsy had played for Celtic at Dumfries in October, reported, "He is a very little fellow, only 19, but he is as cunning and elusive in his tricks as the ripest of veterans." The following Saturday, Gallacher scored his first goal for Celtic in a 4-1 win over Queen's Park at a wintry Celtic Park, and Bedouin, in the Daily Record of the 11th of December 1911, wrote, "Gallacher has come to stay at Parkhead. On a snow-clad surface, where the ball was deadened by the snow, well-meant passes did not travel the desired length, and the players had to be uncommonly alive to the altered conditions. None bettered this diminutive Clydebank youth of 19, and the applause that greeted his subtle and elusive moves bespoke for him a spell of popularity in his new quarters. So effective was Gallacher that once McMenemy returns to the team, a place in the side will have to be found for this ready-made football artist." It would be a mistake to think that Celtic's form immediately improved with the emergence of Patsy Gallacher, and the year was ended with a defeat away to Third Lanark and draws with Morton and Airdrieonians, and Patsy was dropped for the New Year's Day match against Rangers at Celtic Park when the visitors were routed as Jimmy Quinn scored yet another hat-trick against the Ibrox club. Gallacher did not appear again until a 3-1 win over Third Lanark at home on the 3rd of February 1912, scoring Celtic's second with a header. The Daily Record wrote of the two inside forwards on the 5th of February. Travers was solid without being brilliant, but Gallacher was both. If the Clydebank youth had a fault, it was in being too eager. Over the next couple of months, Gallacher was in and out of the side and was dropped for the Scottish Cup tie against East Stirling on the same day as the Clyde v Rangers tie was abandoned with 15 minutes to go as fans rioted with Clyde 3-1 ahead. Clyde claimed the tie afterwards and Rangers conceded. On the 23rd of March 1912, Patsy came back into the team with Jimmy McMenemy moved to inside left. David Potter writes in The Mighty Atom that in the days before the match, McMenemy had approached Willie Maley with the proposal. "Excuse me, boss, I've a suggestion. That young Gallacher is too good to keep out. He's a better inside right than me, or at least if he's no new, he soon will be." Maley's jaw dropped at such self-effacing honesty on the part of one of his greatest ever players. "But," continued Jimmy, his confidence growing, "I can still play. Why not try me at inside left at Aberdeen on Saturday and let Patsy play at inside right? I've played at inside left once or twice afore. Sonny thinks it's worth a go as well. Saturday's game's only a friendly, more or less." Maley stared and thought hard. Truth to tell, he had been thinking about jettisoning the great Napoleon altogether. In fact, he reproached himself for not doing it earlier this season. But now here was a suggestion. He stared at the wall, then said, "All right, Jimmy, I'll think about it." It's a good story, but the match at Pittodrie was not the first time Gallacher and McMenemy played together. Gallacher was inside right and McMenemy inside left in the 1-1 draw against Morton at Celtic Park on the 23rd of December 1911. The move was probably prompted more by the failure of the other inside forward, Paddy Travers, to convince Maley he was worth a permanent place in the team. In any case, the next two matches were the Scottish Cup semi-final, a 3-0 win over Hearts, and the final against Clyde, when fittingly Gallacher and McMenemy scored the goals in a 2-0 win. Gallacher's goal came as a result of great work on the right wing by Andy McAtee, and the pair were already forming a productive partnership on Celtic's right flank. In his first Scottish Cup final, just 5 months after making the step up to the senior game, Gallacher added to a growing reputation and was expected to play an even bigger role in the coming months. The Scottish referee reported on the 8th of April 1912, "Young Pat Gallacher, the second bearer of an honoured Celtic name, added lustre to his reputation when he cleverly scored the second point. It will ensure him getting a prolonged trial at inside right in spite of the claims of McMenemy." Gallacher and Celtic added another trophy a month later in the final of the Glasgow Merchants Charities Cup, with Clyde again providing the opposition. This match ended in a 0-0 draw, and as was the practice in that competition, Celtic took the cup by virtue of having won 7 corners to Clyde's none. There followed a tour of Denmark and Norway in June, and Patsy began his first full season in the senior ranks in 1912-13, as a new rule was brought into force preventing goalkeepers from handling the ball outside their penalty areas. Until 1912, goalkeepers had been allowed to handle the ball anywhere in their own half. Few goalkeepers actually ventured outside their penalty areas with the ball anyway, but the rule was brought in because some, notably the Welsh keeper Lee Roos, who played one match for Celtic in March 1910, had developed a tactic of coming to the halfway line and launching long throws into the opposition half, which proved very unpopular with opposition teams. While today we might assume that all goalkeepers would have done this, it was actually very risky. They were not allowed to carry the ball and had to bounce it every few steps, giving opponents the opportunity to nick the ball away. And if they stood still while holding it, opponents were allowed to barge them to make them drop it. Few goalkeepers were willing to risk losing the ball so far out of their goals. The new season proved a disappointment for Celtic, again finishing 4 points behind Rangers in second place, despite beating them in both league matches, giving Rangers a third title in succession since the end of Celtic's 6-in-a-row run in 1910. The Scottish Cup was lost in a 1-0 defeat to Hearts at Celtic Park at the quarter-final stage, and the only silverware of the season came with an epic 3-2 win over Rangers in the final as they retained the Charity Cup, in a match that saw the first appearance of the legendary defence of Shaw, McNair and Dodds that would come to be known, almost blasphemously, as Celtic's Holy Trinity. They would form a barrier as near to impregnable as possible over the next few years, but they had a sticky start, Rangers taking a 2-0 lead in the Charity Cup final. The Scottish referee report of the 12th of May 1913 damned them with faint praise. Shaw proved himself a finished keeper. McNair and Dodds have been seen to better advantage. Still, they were fairly good. Before half-time, Patsy Gallacher hauled Celtic back into the match with a typical piece of skill. The Scottish referee described it. The revival primarily owed itself to Gordon. He presumed too much when he stepped back several yards in order to put in a better clearance. Hill ran in, a scramble ensued, and the ball was sent out to McAtee. The latter was fouled close in, but from the kick he secured the ball near the Rangers line. The wind kept it from going over, and the centre was a good one. Still, the goal was a surprise. Gallacher practically had his back to Hempsey when he caught on, and how he got in such a fine shot was remarkable. The ball hit the post on the way, and the custodian had no chance. The Celts played with great briskness and fire now. The men went at it hammer and tongs, and several nasty incidents were witnessed. Patsy Gallacher was not a player who was ever noted for indulging in what the papers of the time euphemistically called rough play. But he was not one to tolerate being on the end of it either. The Scottish referee noted, Gallacher and Bowie had some very uncharitable interchanges, and but for the interference of referee Bell, these might have developed. Celtic's second and third goals to seal an impressive comeback win were both scored by centre-forward Bernard Connolly, a recent signing from Vale of Clyde, who had opened his Celtic career impressively and would start the new season in fine style in August, but he thereafter faded from the picture. It was only a Glasgow tournament, and not even the Glasgow Cup, but it was a hard-fought match which neither side was taking lightly. The Scottish referee opened its report on the 12th of May 1913. It was known before the Charity Cup final commenced that both Rangers and Celtic were desperately keen, to put it quite mildly, to secure possession of the trophy. Celts especially so, in order not to finish the season barren of honours. Having recorded their third win over Rangers that season, Celtic were now poised to go on another run of league successes, and 1913-14 would prove to be the season in which the already highly rated Patsy Gallacher became the undisputed Prince of Parkhead. Although the double-winning success would owe just as much to that holy trinity of Shaw, McNair and Dodds. Despite opening the new season with a 5-1 victory over newly promoted Ayr United, after which the Scottish referee of the 18th of August 1913 wrote, Gallacher is a marvel. He has no stamina to make a song about, but he takes risks that many a bigger and heavier man would not think of, and the marvel is that he comes out of it scatheless. Celtic made a hesitant start to the campaign, drawing with Motherwell away and Clyde at home in the opening weeks, before consecutive 2-0 defeats to St Mirren at home and Hearts at Tynecastle on the 13th and 15th of September 1913. At this stage, Hearts were top of the league, a point ahead of Rangers on 11 points from 6 games, while Celtic were in 5th place, a point behind Morton and Dundee on 7 points from 6 games. Dundee had a game in hand over Celtic, while Morton had 2. The following week, Celtic visited Capello for what was expected to be a difficult test, and with Jimmy Quinn making one of only 2 league appearances that season, defeated the Greenock side 4-0, Quinn and Gallacher scoring 2 goals apiece. This though didn't signal a great improvement, and they were knocked out of the Glasgow Cup in a 1-0 defeat to Third Lanark on the 7th of October. But, incredibly, this was the last goal Celtic conceded until the 13th of December, and they would not drop another point until the 20th of December in a 0-0 draw at home to Motherwell. The creative burden in this run fell almost entirely on Patsy Gallacher, as Jimmy McMenemy broke his collarbone in an accidental clash during a match against Aberdeen in a 2-1 win at Celtic Park on the 4th of October. By the beginning of November, a week after a 2-0 win over Rangers at Ibrox, they were top of the league, Patsy Gallacher scoring twice in a 4-0 win over Kilmarnock as Hearts went down to defeat against St Mirren. Gallacher is credited with the first goal in this match, although it appears it would probably go down as a bizarre own goal today, or possibly even a free kick to Kilmarnock for Patsy's challenge on the goalkeeper. Grampian, in the Daily Record of the 3rd of November 1913, reported, "Gallacher was the scorer. He sent in a low shot from short range which brought Grant to the ground in saving, and followed up so quickly that he flurried the prostrate keeper into flinging the ball against the upright, from whence it deflected through." As well as being an incredibly talented player, Patsy Gallacher was as brave as a lion, and did not shirk from the physical side of the game. And even as the pitches became muddy and heavy as winter wore on, unlike most smaller players, he never seemed to be affected by the condition. The Daily Record noted after a 2-0 win over Queen's Park on the 8th of November, "The stamina and running of this youngster are amazing." While the same paper reported the following Monday, after Patsy's 2-goal performance in a 4-0 win over Dumbarton at Boghead, "Of all the 10 forwards, there was not one to compare with Gallacher. He dodged and dribbled, feinted and turned, as if he had been playing on a Brussels carpet, instead of the muddy surface which kept others floundering." In the continuing absence through injury of Jimmy Quinn, who was recovering from an operation on his knee, Celtic had tried Bernard Connolly and Jimmy McCall at centre-forward, but neither had been convincing. And in December, an Englishman was signed on loan from Clyde with the wonderfully Dickensian name of Ebenezer Owers, probably the only Ebenezer ever to play for Celtic. He made his debut against 3rd Lanark on the 6th of December, joining Gallacher on the score sheet in a 3-0 win at Celtic Park, and he followed that with another goal in a 2-1 win over Raith Rovers on the day the Holy Trinity conceded a goal for the first time since October. They would not concede again until the 28th of February. Owers scored 4 goals in a 6-0 win away to Ayr United on the 27th of December, on the day Jimmy McMenemy made his comeback from his broken collarbone, and 5 days later, Napoleon showed he was still one of the best inside forwards in the country as he inspired Celtic to a 4-0 win over Rangers. McMenemy scored Celtic's second goal just before half-time in a manner reminiscent of Jimmy Quinn at his best. Brigadier in the Daily Record described it on the 2nd of January 1914. "McMenemy took a pass from McMaster and dribbled ahead straight for goal. Gordon dashed after him and attempted to charge him off the ball, but he held on, and next avoiding Ormond, was left with a clear space for a shot. He took it deliberately, and the ball beat Hempsey high up. It was possibly the best goal McMenemy has ever scored." Only poor finishing prevented Celtic running up a record score, with the unfortunate Owers missing several clear chances. But the win left Celtic firm favourites for the title, with only Hearts, 4 points behind but with a game in hand, looking as if they had a hope of catching them. Gallacher scored a hat-trick in a 4-0 win over Dumbarton at Celtic Park on the 10th of January, after which the Scottish referee reported on the 12th of January 1914, "Gallacher was the hero of the day. The little 'un simply dazzled the onlookers by his play." Before perhaps the most significant day of the campaign a week later, when they visited Dens Park, a ground on which Celtic had not won for over a decade. Without Alec McNair, Sonny Jim Young and Andy McAtee, who received the news that his father had died suddenly that morning, it was a weakened Celtic who travelled to a very difficult venue and returned with a 1-0 win thanks to a goal from left-winger Johnny Browning. Old Strathmore, in the Daily Record of the 19th of January 1914, wrote of the wondrously clever play by Gallacher, and made a point of mentioning, "It makes one's flesh creep to see this slip of a lad tilting against 6-footers." At the same time as Celtic were winning in Dundee for the first time since 1901, nearest challengers Hearts lost 2-1 to Dumbarton at Boghead, and Celtic were now firm favourites for the title. Brigadier wrote in the Daily Record of the 19th of January 1914, "The defeat sustained by the Hearts at Dumbarton was one of a certain selection of things that should not have occurred if Tynecastle's darlings were to continue to menace Celtic's pre-eminence. It is only the Hearts' second defeat, but they have lost 6 points in drawn games, and points lost have the same value whether they go by draws or defeats. A lead of 3 points for Celtic to obtain over the Hearts is of much greater significance than a similar advantage over Rangers would be. But as the Parkhead Club have now put a 6-point gulf between them and their Ibrox rivals, they, as I say, must be regarded as going straight for the flag." An unexpected 1-0 defeat to Falkirk at Brockville on the 28th of February, the first goal conceded since the 13th of December, and a 0-0 draw with Hearts at Celtic Park on the 24th of March kept the title race live until after the Scottish Cup was secured in April. But otherwise, Celtic's progress in the league was remorseless, and the only other match they failed to win before clinching the championship was the Scottish Cup final against Hibernian in a scoreless draw at Ibrox on the 11th of April. In a busy week, Celtic defeated Queen's Park 5-0 in the league on Monday. Centre-forward Ebenezer Owers replaced by Jimmy McCall, who seized his chance to score a double, the others coming from Gallacher, McAtee and McMenemy, before facing Hibernian in the Scottish Cup final replay 3 days later on Thursday the 16th of April 1914. This time Celtic won easily, McCall scoring twice in the first 10 minutes and Johnny Browning adding a third shortly before half-time. The Scottish referee of the 17th of April 1914 reported, "The Hibs were really playing like a beaten side. They could do nothing right, and the Celts simply sought to preserve their comfortable lead without any undue exertion." Browning made it 4 with 25 minutes remaining, and it stayed that way until the closing minutes when Hibernian pulled one back. The Scottish referee delivering its verdict on the match gives a clear indication that the Scottish Cup was still a more prestigious competition than the league. "Without a doubt, the Celts worthily earned the right to be called Scotland's champion team." Another indication can be seen from the attendance at Celtic Park 2 days later, when Hibernian were again the opposition, this time in the league. While 60,000 attended the Scottish Cup final the Saturday before, and 30,000 for the replay on Thursday afternoon, only around 12,000 turned up to see Celtic score 3 times without reply to clinch the championship and another double, a feat it would take them 40 years to repeat. The Glasgow Merchants Charities Cup was won with a thumping 6-0 win over Third Lanark, who had beaten Rangers in the semi-finals on the 12th of May, to bring the curtain down on Celtic's most successful season since 1907-08, when all 4 trophies had been won. The team now look forward to a summer tour of Germany and Austria-Hungary, and the Scottish referee reported on the 15th of May 1914, "It was a merry party of Celtic players that left St Enoch on Wednesday for the Contenong, that famous victory over Third Lanark the previous evening, putting the copestone on a season of almost unprecedented success." The paper went on to say, "The Celts had an enthusiastic send-off from St Enoch Station on Wednesday morning. With the exception of Alec McNair, all the Parkhead regulars, along with reserves McGregor, Jarvis and Crone, will take part in the 6 matches arranged. Directors James Kelly, John McKillop and Michael Dunbar, and Secretary William Maley are also of the party." Patsy Gallacher set out on that summer tour, no longer a frail youth looked at askance by sceptical teammates and opponents alike. He was still frail, but at the age of 23, he was now a player with a burgeoning reputation as a brilliantly unorthodox footballing artist, and firmly established as an equal to the great McMenemy. As the Scottish referee asked rhetorically on the 13th of April 1914, "Where will you get a forward line with 2 such initiators of telling movements as James McMenemy and Patsy Gallacher?" By the time the new season started in August 1914, there were far, far more important questions to be answered.